Hi there, I'm Lorna. I founded Women Who Want More UAE, and I have been reaching out to several interesting people to kind of get their perspectives. I was really moved to approach Esraa regarding culture and identity, and we've had several chats about this now, so I'm very excited to share this conversation with the community because she has vast perspective on this. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Esraa, because I know there is so much there when it comes to culture. How would you describe your cultural associations?
Thank you. So I think this is one of the questions that most people ask is like, where are you from? And it's a very complicated question for a lot of us, but that's just part of the globalized world that we live in. I usually limit it now. I've learned to limit it to say Sudanese American, and it depends on who is talking to me. Sometimes I just say Sudanese, and sometimes I just say American. But of course, like there is a whole history or ancestors that are from elsewhere. Like a long time ago, there were no invisible borders and names of lands and stuff. So if you start tracing back beyond the US, which is our last stop before coming to UAE or Sudan, you would find tribes coming from Iraq and Morocco and Maghreb and Timbuktu and Mali. So we are like a representative of a lot of very different cultures, but as you move on in life, you kind of connect to the last stop. And for me, the last stop is definitely the US and Sudan. So it's there is an actual identity that's called Sudanese Americans, and they have a very distinct feel to them and a distinct background that they have, experienced. So that's how I would describe where I'm from. And of course, I don't know like if that is also included in my identity, but my husband is American of European background, so that comes into the mix and stuff. So hi.
Sorry, let's go back to that. So yeah, you were saying you have a blended household as well. So how has that worked out? And I think particularly once you have children, is like these things often come to the fore, like, oh, well, we do it this way and you do it that way. And how do you decide who's sort of...
The thing is that when the father and mother come from very different backgrounds, you start picking whatever background. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You start picking the pieces that you want to put together as your family system or family life together. So we don't really label things as this is Sudanese and this is American and this is this and that, because think about it, like part of my identity is American and my husband is American. So it's already in the mush of what I am. So there isn't this feel of like two very different things coming together. It's kind of like 3/4 of a thing, and then there's this quarter that's a little bit different, coming from my husband's family. But then that could happen even within the same culture, right? You could have two families that grew up very differently, and then you got married and you do it differently. So the type of differences that we have is the type of differences you could have even within a similar culture. So what any successful marriage and successful family would do is they build their own life together. And I think one of the main thing that really helped my husband and I is that we got married relatively young. So I was 21 years old, and he was in his late 20s. So we were like in our 20s when we got together. So we were still building our lives, meaning he didn't have his first house or proper job, or I wasn't done studying. So when you get together at that stage in life, you are building together at so many different levels, not only in cultures or systems, but you're like building life. Nothing is cemented versus someone who builds their whole life and graduates and buys the house and buys the furniture, then gets married. Then there is this whole like, you're developed already fully and you're trying to make it work. So for us, we were young and growing, so it naturally came with the growth. It just became like a system that we created together without really focusing on like culture. It became, I like this, I don't like that. Why? Like trying to put those together.
It is, and it's interesting when you talk about culture, because it could mean the society that you're from, but also even individual families have culture. Like you say, me and my husband are both from the UK primarily, and we find ourselves arguing over ridiculous stuff. Well, we do it this way, and I think what's really important as well is to say, okay, we've always done it this way, but is my way actually right? Like, is it something I enjoy? Is it something I want to take forward? Or is it just because I've always done it that way? And I think
Yeah,
it's nice once you meet someone else from a different family or from a different culture, you can sort of say, well, we'll take this, we'll leave this of mine behind, and actually you're always better here. So,
yeah.
and it
And
goes as well
not
for the
only that,
restrictions, like limitations. There's a lot of expectations on certain denominations, right? And family
yeah,
expectations. It gives you the
yeah,
option to sort of try more stuff, I guess.
yeah. But you know what? When you were talking, it also like reminded me that I don't want to underplay that there are like totally different cultures and it's unique to the family, because when you take a broad stroke of a culture that's high context versus low context, regardless of what your family is within that, in general, you take something from that.
Yeah.
Like for me, words don't have that much weight
Mm.
as much as the body language, your feel, your tone, which is kind of really difficult, because if you're dealing with me, whether it's like at work or at home or whatever, if your face is straight and you're saying all the right things, I don't really care. It's how it feels. So if you're someone who's accustomed to um, be professional by saying all of the right things, and it's not going to work with me anyways, because you have to be genuine. You have to really feel it, and using words like saying please and then saying something rude after it doesn't make it polite to me. um, like the tone, I tune into too much stuff. I come from a high context society. It's very much part of me. I can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
And to me, I almost feel like within me, it's more right than just words. Like
Yeah.
to me, words
Yeah.
means nothing. You have to, like, if you can't really be sorry, I don't care if you learn to say sorry. It means
Yeah.
nothing. So, and my husband comes from a very, um, it's like low context. So basically he knows all the polite things to say and when, and they have like certain things. And if he said it, he feels like, okay, I've said that. Like, what do you want more? And it's like thing, that thing that you can't see. I want that thing that you can't see. So
Yeah.
it's like, it took a while to kind of bring him here and for me to go there.
Yeah.
So for me to value saying stuff more than doing gestures without putting a narration to it, and for him to be really conscious that when the words come out, it comes with the feel of it too, and totally being in the experience. So these are certain things that comes with being in a household with different cultures. And also like yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't want to
Well,
like, this topic is
it's
very deep.
very, yeah, we've talked about a
Yeah,
million things, right? But you're very right. I think it's being mindful of those differences, because I'm a person who's, if you've said it, regardless of what your body language is telling me, like, your word is your word, and I'm expecting you to do whatever you say, and that's
yeah,
caused me some problems in the past, because people are like, yeah, and then they've got no problem with breaking that word, and I'm left feeling very confused, but you said you would.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's helpful to actually dig in and understand those different value sets from cultures, right? Because then that will help you communicate more effectively, and that's the basis of relationships and
And
getting
you know
things
what?
done.
And you know what's really interesting? Like, think about it. I feel like, and this is my only feeling, is that even within the West, uh, Americans seem very expressive, in
Compared to
general.
Brits.
Us, compared to Sudanese, it's not. It's very low context.
Mm,
So it's really interesting. Even the definitions of what is low context, when you put two cultures together, like suddenly a culture that seems very expressive seems not so straightforward,
mm,
or seems not so keeping their emotions contained and decent, you know. So even within that, it wasn't close enough to what I was used to. So I had to. It was a, you know.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I know you've experienced various cultures and moving around. What is it like to integrate into a place, and particularly as a minority?
The thing about the minority thing is a very interesting thing, because in Sudan, so I talked about being Sudanese and American. In Sudan, we are minorities, or wrongfully so thought of as minorities. Like people who are from the west of Sudan primarily are thought of as minorities. So I have 4 grandparents. Part of them are not from the west of Sudan, part of them are from the west of Sudan. But for that piece of it, once you have a blood piece from the west of Sudan, you are all Western Sudanese, regardless of your Arabic roots or any of these other things. So anyways, living as a child, being from a minority group within Sudan, I think was a very uncomfortable experience for me growing up, because there's a lot of things that you feel even growing up with your parents, and how they're really careful about talking about their identity, whereas you would expect your parent to celebrate their identity. No, we were trying to assimilate. You know, it's all of the jokes, like growing up and stuff like that, even amongst friends and stuff like that, the Sudanese, were about people who seem to be part of my identity, right? The way they pronounce things, this, that.
You're the butt of the joke.
Yeah, and to be really honest, it wasn't until I was in college, like close to when I was about to graduate, I met a prince from Nigeria. And I remember I asked, I was like, oh, where are you from? Because I recognized he was from Africa, somewhere in Africa. And the way he said, he was like, I am Sirajo. His name is Sirajo. I'm Sirajo. I'm a Fulani prince. And I was like, this was me. I was like, you tell people you're Fulani? Like, it was so shocking to me. But he was proud of it. I was like, don't tell anyone that. But then it was the first time I realized, outside of that context, in other places, there were writers and poets and doctors, and the president of the countries from there, and they had status. I was just in the wrong side of the invisible border somewhere, you know? So it was that. And then another experience that was like really interesting to me was when I was working for Population Action International. We were doing this AIDS work and shooting a documentary in Kenya. And I went to Kenya. And when I went to Kenya, suddenly my features, myself, was very beautiful. Whereas I think growing up in Sudan, the more you look Turkish, the more you look Indian, Turkish, Lebanese, whatever, the more beautiful you look. And we have a lot of tribes that do look like that. So we weren't deemed beautiful people at all. And suddenly I go just south of Sudan, like to the south, and it was like, literally, do you know that commercial where they're singing, who's that lady? Who's that lady? Who's that lady? It was literally, I was like in a whole country where people are just smiling at me. Like the flowers are opening up and people are smiling, people are waving, and people are like, you're so beautiful, for no reason. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't my parents come to Kenya instead of, migrating? Like, it was really, I have memories of Nairobi and Kenya that's not like any other place. Like literally, it was the most place that I felt beautiful, and I've never experienced that like that anywhere else again. So to me, it's all part of the narrative, right? And it took me until I was an adult, a very, very old adult, to realize that these ideals are only limited to this very particular place and limited to these particular people. And it shifts when you move, and it shifts by time, and it shifts as generations become more globalized. So why grow up and lock in something that's so shifty,
Yeah,
you know?
that's a really nice
So
perspective.
yeah, so there was that, of course, the being a minority in your country. Then we
Yeah.
go and we get another citizenship and we migrate for the land of opportunities, and we become Americans, and I become handed down so many cards of minorities. Like, at least before I had one. Suddenly I went into America and I became minority times 6 billion. It was like I was handed the African American card, the Black American card. I was handed, of course, there is also like the whole like women equality, I got handed the woman card. I got handed the Muslim American community card, which is a minority religion that a lot of people are really scared of, that's foreign to the country card. I got handed the African immigrant card. The immigrant card itself, like in general, there is like so many different layers, and then it's all the compounding factor of having all of these together in like an individual. It became like I had to either have that drown me or use that to my advantage. And I think at the age of 13, we went to the US twice. The first time was in 1988. And then my dad was an expat in Saudi for like 6-7 years. And then we came back again. So I was a little bit older. I was a 13-year-old. And at that moment of time, you had to grow really fast, because I realized that regardless of this thing I have that tells me I'm a citizen, it doesn't, I have to somehow work really hard. Like, I think one of the examples I was sharing with you of, like, as a 13-year-old going into the grocery store and buying milk, like you see people in line, they're going about their business. They're sleeping, they're eating, they're taking their kids to school, they're coming back. For me, the level of awareness, like I'm wired to scan the environment, scan people's faces, feel if somebody's feeling uncomfortable or not, being extra nice, which means, Esraa, I can't have many not happy days or bad days, right? I have to have happy days. I have to have good days every day, which helped me as an adult, because I built tools of how to regulate myself daily, because I had to be like a good representations of Muslims, a good representations of immigrants, a good representations of Blacks, a good representation of everything.
Well, it sounds
Straight
exhausting.
A student, yeah, straight A, do everything, abide by the law. I wasn't searching for my identity and experimenting with things. No, I was just like, we need to,
It sounds like such a responsibility just to represent one of those, because unfortunately people, when you are, a smaller number in a society, people do look at you and they create stereotypes from that. So like you say, if you're having a bad day, they might be like, well, everybody's like that from there. And that is a big burden to carry. But what I really like, you can blend in, like you say, and we talked about this sort of, assimilation, but standing out is another way of doing that. And you talked about your headscarf with me earlier, and I mean your whole sort of persona and your you're very colorful in personality, very colorful in your clothing, and that's something that really draws people towards you. I think that whole thing just fits together beautifully. But you said, in the scarf in particular, is something that helps you with your identity and letting people know and signaling that you are a Muslim woman, and it's something to be very proud of.
Yeah. The thing is that as time went by, right, you have all of these different minority cards, but one of them becomes more doable and more allows for you to belong without questioning. So if you think about it, the card of an African American card, that was a very hard one for me to suddenly, at the age of 13, embody it. Right? So you can misrepresent, you can talk about things that you don't know about, you can talk about experiences you haven't experienced. It was a very dangerous card for me to carry. Even the African card, I felt very not African for a lot of African community. folks until I grew up and knew that we are all of these different things. But as a child, like I felt like I didn't, living in Saudi Arabia and living in the US, I didn't really know much about the continent, to be real, to be really honest. So it was also a very difficult card for me to take. And then immigration, I didn't choose that. Like there was all, so the Muslim American card was the only card where nobody could tell you, no, you're not Muslim American. You can't belong. It was very diverse. There was room for all. There was room for a Sudanese American that came from Saudi. There was room for, you know, you can be Mexican American, you can be from any Arab country, you can be from anywhere. So it was a very diverse enough community and diverse enough of a card that I could actually represent, and I could actually make a change in that very particular one without feeling like an imposter syndrome or, you know, any of that. So I remember when I was like in high school, and in high school, I was really like trying to be out there, loudmouth, had lots of friends. I hopped between the different tables. I was in the white table, the black table, the Spanish. By the way, they have tables. They don't all eat together. I don't know why, but it's not legally segregated, but people just naturally segregated themselves. There's the Gothic table. There's they have all of these different tables that I used to, you know, I tried being in all of the different tables, and to be really honest, like I was an odd piece of an individual. Even I remember when I was in the African American table and I went and I got my pizza and I sat there, I brought the fork and the knife and I was like, hello guys, how are you doing? And they're like, what is this creature? Like, somebody tell me, like, she looks like us, but you eat a pizza like this, you know, like I was very strange. So so what happened was, in particular, when I started wearing a scarf was around Ramadan. So in Ramadan, we fast, and I was fasting, but because I wanted to still be cool and everything like that, I would go and not eat and sit in, you know, the dining room tables. Every time I would pass through the hallway to go to the dining room table, I would see some of the Muslim children lining up, sitting on the hallway, not going in. And you would hear comments from children going into the cafeteria and out, making fun of them or whatever. A lot of them had, you know, hijab on and stuff like that. And me going in with the crew that's making fun and the cool kids, it did not sit right with me at all. Like something was just like, you know. And then there's something about me that I felt that I was strong and grounded enough that I could maybe bridge the gap, because if you like me, maybe you can like people like me, you know. It was something like that. So in the middle of the week, in the middle of the school year, where I've never worn a scarf, I came into school in, like, I remember a turtleneck and these cool jeans with like these belt buckle looking things and a scarf. And I didn't wear it this way. I wear it like this, the proper way that the other kids were wearing. And it was just kind of like everybody like, Esraa, like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, cool, you know, and continued on doing that. What it did, actually, it did open doors or connected me more to the Muslim American community. So it started with that to, no, I'm good. You go to lunch. I'm going to stay with them and, you know, talking and you know, chilling with them and stuff. And then it grew into so much more than that. I felt like I could do more. So I ran for president of the Muslim Students Association. It was a very small club. Like there was Model UN and cheerleading and drill and all of these. And there was the Muslim Students Association, the boring small club. And in that school, historically, there were like usually guys that won that. So I was like really bidding for like a female to be president of the club. So I got it. And when I got it, it was a very different club. So basically, the membership really increased a lot that year. I remember we ended up with like 55 members from like, you know, low digits. You're talking about 10 to 13. And it even got to the point where we had non-Muslims joining the club. It became a cool thing. And I think during that time, there was one of these political things happening. I don't remember if it was Iraq or Palestine, something. But I remember during that time, it brought people together. I was testing my limits because I made sure that there was like prayers in an American public school, which it's very hard to imagine for a lot of people something like that would happen. But we would get an imam from a local mosque to come and literally in an American auditorium with a microphone. Assalamu alaikum, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I can't imagine in Trump era what that would look like, but you know, people got passes. I advocated for people to get passes in order for them to leave classes to go and join Friday prayers. There was lots of non-Muslims who wanted to get out of class, so they just joined in. They're like, I'm going to pray. They're like, hey, but you Christian, I'm going to pray. You know, so you don't want to question that. So a lot of people started joining in.
It's nice to bring people
really
together, right?
Yeah.
And
There's one very
exposing more people
particular
to Islam as well. I think that's a really nice thing because sometimes it can be seen as inaccessible and hard to understand. I guess it's not as relevant here where, you know, the population is very open about that and we live in an Islamic culture, but it's not always the case. And unfortunately, we're running out of time now, but I just want to sort of wrap this up and say, you know, we're talking about culture and identity. What is your sort of key takeaway on all of this?
This was a really big, broad topic.
We can't help ourselves, can we? This is like the third time we've talked about this, and we're just like this.
Exactly, because it's like there's so many different angles about it. When we talk about culture and identity, okay, I think one of the things that we need to realize is that there is more of an ability for people to belong to lots of different things. The world is much more open nowadays for you to identify what you belong to than we did like 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. So that allows for a lot of people to feel aligned with their true selves, whatever that might be. And the other thing is that we don't need to be purist anymore, like just purely something. And that happens at many different levels, not only at a cultural level, but even at a career level. When somebody says, I'm a scientist, but I like stitching. What does that mean? Do I quit my job and start stitching? You know, these inability to understand that you can be both. Why can't you be a scientist?
Right?
Yeah.
It gives you that flexibility, and especially in a time like this, a lot of people are finding themselves out of work. How can you pivot? And the more diversity you've got and blending these things together, the further you can go.
Yes. So even if your culture like makes sense, like your identity, you should accept that you are a lot of many different things, and that could be a strength instead of it's something pushing you down. Absolutely. And standing out is sometimes a strength. It definitely is a strength. I've experienced this my whole life, and I guess we'll leave this off with now that there is a quarantine, I'm going through an identity dilemma because all of the pictures that I'm liking are of ceramics and stitching and arts, and I don't do anything like that. Yoga, arts, and stitching, and this I don't do yoga. I don't paint. I don't stitch, and I don't do ceramics. But that's what I'm attracted to. Yet my whole life is data and I don't know, like data and microbes and research. And so
that's actually a really nice metaphor of cultures. You know, I will never know what it means to be Sudanese. I'll never know what it means to be American even, but to be able to appreciate those things without necessarily having to own it for myself, it's quite a liberating thought. Saying I appreciate it. I just, you know, it's not mine, but it's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might start a stitching account soon.
Well, I look forward to seeing that. Okay, lovely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. We need to wrap it up there, but it was a really healthy conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing your perspectives with us.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.